Welcome to Business Notes. I'm your host, Diane Bogino, and I'm excited to have Dr. Candy Campbell on the show today. Dr. Campbell is an international speaker, an award-winning actor, author, filmmaker, portrait artist, and nurse. As a professional actor, Candy has appeared on stage, screen, radio, and TV. She co-founded an improv and stand-up comedy group in the San Francisco area in the 90s, and since then has facilitated improv training to teams of all sorts in 3 countries. Because she's an improv actor, I have no idea what she's going to say. But here's Candy to give us all a shot of inspiration. Dr. Campbell, welcome to Business Notes, and thank you so much for being with us today.
My pleasure, Diane.
I am so anxious to talk to you because you are so talented. You've got talent like oozing out of your pores. And your resume is so unusual. So tell our audience, how did you go from a nurse to an actor to a filmmaker?
Well, actually, the chronology was a little not that way. It was that when I was a little girl, I was quite shy. And when I was around 5 years old, the summer before kindergarten, somebody came to the door, a teenager, and she had an idea for the summer business. She's really brilliant. She gathered up all the little kids in the neighborhood. There's like 7 of us who were really, young. And she allowed us for 2 or 3 hours, 5 days a week, to be in her playhouse. And we brought our dolls, and she taught us how to speak, how to tell a story, and how to be in front of an audience, how to be a good audience, all of these things. She went on to found her own dance company. And it was just one of those revelatory experiences that my mother was just happy to get me out of the house, out from under her feet. And I just remember how clever she was, that we didn't have to be on the spot ourselves. We could bring our dolls up to the front and say, my name is whatever it is. Anyway, that was the first time I understood what it was like to be in front of people and to have a positive experience about that. So by the time I got to college, at first I thought I was going to be a broadcast journalist. That was my path. But then, as fate would have it, I sort of got looped into the drama department and TV department. And so I graduated with my first degree is in speech communications with an emphasis in acting. Well, then, you graduate from college and I had such high hopes. One thing led to another, and I was on the path to, my dream was to be a repertory actor. And a surprising thing happened to me on the way to becoming a repertory actor. I was cast in some summer stock just before I was to take off for New York. And I had what maybe now they call a Me Too moment when the director tried to make some moves on me. He sort of got me alone, and I was so young and so naive. I knew him. I pushed him away from me and said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "Well, come on. This is the way the game is played, And I said, "Not for me." I walked off the show. And he's like, "You can't do that. We open in 3 weeks." And I'm like, because I was the lead, this is not for me. And then I didn't act again for 10 years. And I found another life.
Wow, what a story. Good grief. That's that's unfortunate that happened, but it was fortunate for your next career, which you were an academic. So why the career change?
Well, I didn't know what to do right after that. So I had always loved to travel. I had spent some time overseas in college. I studied in Vienna, and I had a French-speaking grandma and a German-speaking grandma, so I could make my way in both languages. So I got hired as a flight attendant with Pan Am. Gone but not forgotten.
Yes.
Yeah. And I realized another dream of traveling the world. It was such a blessing. And during that time, I was still stewing over the fact that I didn't get to be an actor. I really wanted to do that. And so I thought to myself, well, all right, I'm going to make lemonade out of lemons. I'm going to study all the dialects. And then, of course, during that time, I lived in 6 cities in 5 years. I got to live in London for 2 years, which is now providential because, of course, Miss Nightingale was English. And so years later, when I got back into acting, that training stood me well. And it was actually on one of those flights that I got what we call the call to be a nurse.
Did something happen on the flight that?
Oh, yes. Yes. All right. Well, yes, it was an not too unusual flight. We were flying from New Delhi, India to Karachi, Pakistan. And I don't know if you've ever been on one of those flights. It's about 4.5 hours and it's loaded. And so we had grandmas and grandpas and toddlers and all the family members, plus their chickens and ducks. Yeah, international laws were different. And well, do you remember, Diane, flying in the day? Economy, you served a hot meal, a small but 3-course meal, chicken, fish, or steak. Right?
That's right.
And after that meal, the air conditioning was not doing well on that airplane that day. So it was hot. It was a full 747. My seatmate and I were told to sit down because we were going to have some turbulence. So we sat in the back with a view of 124 people. And then we took a really big dive. And we watched as 124 people vomited. Unison. And I learned that day there's 2 types of people in the world, those that run to help and those that run to hide. And I did the first and she did the second. And when it was all over, you know, we had been discussing on takeoff that we had both been flying about 5 years and we were, you know, ready to get on with our life. We were mid-20s. Everybody else was getting married and having kids. And we, you know, it was impossible to do with a schedule where you're out of town 15 to 20 days a month. So we were both thinking about other things. And I told her that when I was a little kid, I thought I'd either be an actor or a nurse because I like to take care of people. And so here we are. We come back to the seat after I've stood up and helped cover the muck and so forth. Because remember, Diane, everybody had a blanket in those days, remember?
Right,
a blanket
right.
and a pillow
Right.
were provided. So she said, however did you do that? And I said, well, you know, you just breathe through your mouth and do the best you can. And besides, if it wasn't so sad that they were sick, you know, to see those ribbons of vomit, it was artistic. It was artistic. And she said, you should become a nurse because you have that sick sense of humor. So I did.
Oh, the key to nursing, a sick sense of humor. Okay, I got it. That's a great story. Oh my goodness. So, you know, why should we, us little peons, be interested in improv other than just for entertainment?
Well, you know, that is a great question because it didn't click in my brain right away that there was an application in real life. At first, when I co-founded an improv company in the early 1990s in San Francisco, I'd gone through a divorce and I just wanted to laugh again.
Yeah.
So I was studying stand-up comedy. I did stand-up comedy for 9 years because the best comedians are the ones that can make fun of their own pain. I was in a lot of pain. So
Right.
so then I noticed that everybody that I was working with in my stand-up coaching classes, they were all taking improv, and they were being much more relaxed on stage. So that's how I got into it. And those other comics and I, there was 3 others, we created this company. And so one night after a performance, it was 1995, a fellow came up afterwards. Well, people always used to come up afterwards and say things like, "Oh, you must have planned it. That was so funny," and blah, blah. And he stood back while we explained to the other people, no, 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 we didn't have a plant. You heard the suggestions. They were all ad lib. We just created it. And so after everybody else left, he came up and he said, "Look, I get it. I understand now. It was hard to believe, but what I take from this is that you, for some reason, were able to take a problem, spontaneously solve it. And can you come and talk to my engineers?" Yeah.
Oh, no.
Yeah. So as it turned out, I was the only one of the 4 of us who had training in curriculum development. That was my minor, was teaching. So that was my very first facilitation experience as an improv trainer. And here's what surprised me, Diane, and the reason that I continue to do it. First of all, it was so much fun for them and for me. And second of all, the lessons that they gleaned during our debriefings, I realized this is going to change not only their professional lives, but their personal lives too, because we learn how to observe and listen and connect and spontaneously create new ideas. Creating a culture of safety is really the key, where your whatever you say is going to be valued and accepted. Well, that creates just a fertile soil for idea growth. And of course, being a nurse, and then at the time, I knew that miscommunication in healthcare was a big problem. So I started knocking on the door, pitching what I was doing with Silicon Valley startups in healthcare, and nobody was listening.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah. Nobody would listen. And
how did you get their attention?
Well, that's another story. So they said, that might be nice for these startups, but we in healthcare must see the evidence. We have evidence-based practice. So by that time, I'd already taken a master's in public policy, actually, helping to shape healthcare legislation. But I said, okay, well then, I guess I'm going to have to find some evidence. And that became my doctoral work, showing the application. I did a workshop over at Stanford's Children's Hospital with groups that were at loggerheads, and followed up. It was qualitative research, and that was the beginning.
Now, you've written about 6 books. So tell us about those, and are you writing another one?
Yes. Well,
tell us about that.
Here's another thing. I want to encourage your listeners. Please don't be gobsmacked by that fact. I never woke up saying I want to write books or be a filmmaker. No. It was like the opportunities were sort of foisted upon me. And, as a person of faith, I always said, well, okay, Lord, if you think I can do something, then just show me the path and I'll do it. So the first thing that happened was that when I started teaching improv, those books have been my last. But the first books that I started writing were the children's books. My mom is a nurse, and my grandma is a nurse, and I was a preemie. And it all started because I thought I would find them to give as gifts to other nurses, and I couldn't find them. And I thought, oh, for heaven's sakes. This was after my first one-person show. That's another story. But I thought, oh no, is this another project I got to do? And yes, so that became that. And then my third solo show, is An Evening with Florence Nightingale. And people started asking me, oh, do you have something else? And I'm thinking, like, what? Here's a business card. And they're like, no, how about a book? And so, of course, I'm going to write the book. And then when I got later to do the doctoral project on all of this, I realized that there was more application that I needed to do. So I've outlined 4 books, the first of them being Improv to Improve Healthcare. The one I'm almost finished with now is Improv to Improve Your Leadership Team, which cuts across all industries, not just healthcare. And then there are 2 more.
And Candy, tell us about your film as well.
Well, I was the reluctant filmmaker, really. It was an idea that I never thought I would be a filmmaker. But here's what happened. In 1998, there came out a nationwide study that was carried in all the newspapers about premature babies that had been born in the 80s, mostly to sort of druggy moms at the time, not all, but a lot of them. And they followed some of them for 12 years. And the findings were that the mean IQ for these babies was not very high, and that many of them would not be able to complete more than about a 4th grade education. And the conclusion was a series of rhetorical questions about, should we use our tax dollars to allow the research and the medical technology research and so forth to go on? Well, I began my career as a neonatal nurse in 1989, when we were only saving babies 28, 29 weeks, and not all that to good effect. We saw a lot of death in the NICU. We just didn't have the technology to keep them. And then by 1998, it was a different situation. Oh my goodness. We were then, well, that whole idea of micro premature baby came into being. These are babies 24 to 28 weeks out of the normal 38 to 40 weeks gestation. They're like as big as my hand. And we were saving, depending upon how many weeks, we were saving them largely to good effect. And I had been working in the follow-up clinic, and I knew that a couple of things, where they landed in terms of their family life, the social takes over at about, early on, let's say, early on, and it makes a big difference. Well, what happened was, when that newspaper, remember those newspapers? When
I do, yes.
When that came out, the parents were passing around the newspaper, and then, I remember that day because I was working 7 to 3, and by 10 o'clock in the morning, there was like a chaos in the nursery, and one father boldly came up to the head neonatologist who was making his rounds and said, listen here, I want to talk to the president of this hospital. I want to know if you're going to close down this nursery, because they had a little teeny baby who was going to be with us for at least 2 months, if not 3 months. And so all of us nurses, it wasn't just me, it was just throughout neonatology, we all were saying, well, this study is apples to oranges. It's not what's happening today. The article asked, were we playing God? And should we be doing this?
Mm.
And that opened up a whole can of worms. Well, Diane, as I mentioned, I got back into acting, not only with improv comedy and stand-up comedy, but when my little improv company sort of, when everybody separated, went their ways, I did my first one-person show, then my second one-person show. Now I'm on the third one-person show. But in the meantime, I've had a commercial acting agent for many, many years in the San Francisco area. And I knew producers who used me pretty frequently for commercials, voiceovers and whatnot. And I thought, that's what I'll do. I'll pitch this idea. And I did. I pitched it to the first, then the second, then the third of my friends who were hiring me as they were producers.
Mm.
They all said the same thing. That sounds like a really interesting idea. You should probably do it. And I'm like, me? I'm not the filmmaker here. And 2-1, they said, yes, and if you give me this idea, then I'll put my spin on it. And I'm like, oh, well, I could be a technical advisor. They're like, that's not how it works. If I'm producing a film, I get to know what's in the film. You don't get to tell me. And besides, we're busy. You need to go to film school. So I reluctantly did. And all the stories and the obstacles that came, it was quite amazing to me when at the end I got some grants, and there were so many people who showed up when I just didn't know how in the world I was going to do this. I was a single mom of 3 by then, and they were in middle school, high school, and college. I just didn't have any money and I didn't have any time. That's why it took so long. And then finally, I got a call one day from this woman who worked for Time Warner, and she was helping produce an international medical media film contest, or whatever you call that. and she had seen parts of my film when she went to this Film Arts Foundation, which I had gotten a grant, and the people who were really good in audio and video were making it ready for TV at the time. And she saw it and she said, I think you need to enter this competition. And I said, okay. And then she said, you need to come down to LA for the awards ceremony. And that was a plane ticket, hotel, meals, and believe me, I had no money, even though I had a full-time job. That was not in the budget with all the other things I told you about. So I didn't go to the awards presentation. She called me the next day. She said, well, you were missed, but you got one. And there's the film over there. And it's called a Freddie. And she said, you came in second, next to Harpo Studios. You know who that is?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, that's Oprah, who blended that was in 2003, who collaborated with HBO, and they went and took cameras into an operating room where they separated conjoined twins.
Mm.
And it wasn't even HD, my little film. And I will have to tell you, this, again, it was not of myself. This really, I say, was the Lord's work, because the film has been seen on 4 continents. It got educational distributorship. And then after 2 years, I took it back. It's on Amazon now. And the other night, I'm watching TV, Amazon Prime, and you know how it says, based on what you've watched, here's some suggestion. There's my film.
Oh
And
my goodness.
it's still appropriate. It's still only a few things have changed in terms of technology,
Mm.
but it's interviews with families, and the premise question was, how does an extremely low birth weight baby affect the family unit?
Mm.
And it was to answer those people who said, is it worth it?
Yeah. 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 Health conditions affect everyone in the family. Kudos to you. But you mentioned a while ago about your solo show with Florence Nightingale. On a different topic, how does that have anything to do with improv?
Florence Nightingale, in my view, if she were alive, and we do extemporaneous Q&A in the show, I am sure that there are certain things, because she was a lover of learning, that she would do. And if she got wind of the idea of improvisation, which I think she would identify as something that she did anyway. But, it's really hard to do improv if nobody wants to play with you.
True.
And in her tenure, it began, just she learned how to go around over or through obstacles from her youth with this pushback from her family. No, no, no. A nice Victorian lady does not go out and have a career, which is why she never married, although she was engaged and, wanted that life. But as opposed to modern times when we've sort of figured out how to have a career outside of the home and how to still have a family and have children and make it all sort of work. It is work, but it was a totally different time. But when she came to the time in her life that became the time that launched her into celebrity status, it was all in Turkey. She was during the time of the Crimean War. And what she found there was a situation that was so untenable. It was so unhealthy. It was supposedly a hospital. It was so horrible, if you can imagine. Men just laying in their own filth on the floor. And it was beyond words. And she just basically rolled up her sleeves with her 38 nurses, and they got to work. There were over 3,000 patients in that one place. Can you imagine?
Good grief.
And they were dying like flies because of infection.
Mm.
So she just, well, of course, again, talk about a perfect person for this work. She was a force to be reckoned with. She not only could speak 6 languages fluently, including Latin and Greek. That was, two sort of dead languages, but she could manage her way in those ways. But that just gives you an idea of what kind of mind she had. She also had already mastered mathematics and statistics before she even left. She just loved to learn. She loved science and all of this. And so what happened was, even though most of the physician staff spurned the idea of ladies, these nurse ladies being there, because, they weren't used to that. And they didn't like her messing around with the finances. They were used to just doing what they did, and she was giving accurate reports to the home office. They didn't like that either, because for them, it was a matter of saving face and moving up on the military ladder. And if this report of bad situation were to get there, it would be a reflection on their leadership, you see. So she made only 1 or 2 friends from physicians while she was there. But the people she really made friends with were the 3 engineers who were dispatched to clean things up. And those became lifelong friends. And they improved by improving all over the place.
What do you think Florence would tell the healthcare industry today if she were here?
She was an eternal optimist. And I think, first of all, she'd be very surprised that we still have the same problems after such a long time. There's not enough help. There's nurses especially who get dumped with all the work. There's not enough of them, and now they're being discouraged because she lived through epidemic and pandemic as well, and saw how when they came back from the Crimea, most all of those nurses just quit, just said that was it. She had to train up a whole new generation of nurses, which she did by starting a nursing school. She would be a proponent of higher education, although she warned that when and if nursing became such a thing with licensure, she was initially opposed to that because she thought, well, all right, if they get a piece of paper that says they've arrived, then maybe they won't keep learning. So that's the first thing she would say, keep learning. And I was happy to present to the American Nurses Association in a few months ago as her, and I knew that they would accept that message because that's why they were there. And I know she'd be very proud of the nurses today. So keep learning, master the technology. I think another thing that she would say, because we have the agency to do so, is to speak up. You know, this is a big problem in healthcare. They've identified that one of the main problems that cause what we call sentinel events, things that happen that shouldn't ought to have happened. Sometimes those are, you've heard of this, Diane.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody lops off the wrong leg or whatever, or, you know, there was a mistake and somebody dies that shouldn't, that wasn't terminal, right?
Mm-hmm.
Most of that comes from miscommunication. And so that is why I think she'd be a lover of improv, that gives you again, the agency to know that your voice is listened to know that you're heard, to know that your ideas are valuable. And if you have a fertile soil for idea growth, that's how we grow and change. But healthcare has been modeled on the military model, which is a hierarchical chain of command, which is very good in an emergency, right? You want one person telling us, okay, you know, clear, do this, do that. But other than that, I would say most of healthcare is a two-way street with not only the patient, but the family, right? And we've seen this in COVID. How does this affect a person's well-being when they're not able to be supported by their loved ones? You know, she was a great proponent of home health care. The first one to suggest it. The first one to suggest the relationship between sanitation and healthcare. Proper sanitation, nutritious food, education, all of those things. She was really a social scientist. And she would be encouraging nurses in all of healthcare to grab the innovations that they find and add to them.
I want to hear more about, you know, you say Florence had the great resignation. We're going through that today. Tell us more about how you help leaders retain employees today, and talk to us about what you do in that area.
One of the most fun and gratifying jobs that I have. So the interactive keynotes and workshops and one-on-one coaching all have the thread of improvisation, applied improvisation, not improvisation comedy, although it's lots of fun. People are delighted because spontaneously they're put into situations, and when, again, they're given the license to say anything that comes out of their mouth pretty much, what comes out surprises them, and they're tickled that it's so much fun. So we start with the leadership team, and sometimes, I mean, so the keynote, the workshop, and the one-on-one coaching with the leadership, it depends. We can approach it any of the ways, but often it starts when somebody hears about it and needs, let's say there's an executive, they need to create some sort of public forum, or they need to be in front of a large group of employees, or sometimes it's a small group of employees, and they're not, people who are in leadership are not always following the same path. Like politicians who usually need to know how to speak in public and how to present themselves as authentic. Because today, more than ever, we're not willing to listen to people who we can't identify with as authentic and vulnerable, real, who are on our side. And that is the sort of work that is really fun to do, bringing these executives sort of out of their shell, or the ones who are sort of bombastic, to bringing them back in and working on whether it's structure, content, and or delivery, all of those things. But because we do that on a one-on-one, or maybe they've been in one of my keynotes or a workshop, usually it's they start hearing something, somebody's told them about this work. And, I'm not the only actor who's teaching this, but in terms of healthcare, well, that it's more of a category of one. But what I was going to say is that once you understand or hear or learn or involved with this kind of work, it's so engaging. You want to share it with other people. One of my students, when I asked, well, okay, I know you had a great time at this workshop. What I'm trying to find out is, in 3 months when you get the survey, if you're going to feel the same way about it. And she said, oh, I think I will, because it's like you can't unring a bell. And then the follow-up surveys did show that people who go through this training want to share it with others. So that is the way I think when we begin with one team, usually it's the leadership team. Because when you look at all the surveys in healthcare, Press Ganey is one of the biggest ones. But whether it's Gallup or Press Ganey, it doesn't matter. It goes industry wide. When people talk about why they're considering leaving or why they actually left, very often their next touch point person is management. And that's the toughest job in the world.
Yes.
They have to, take the news from on high and be the messenger. Sometimes it's not happy news. and yet also work with these people. So they're just stuck in the middle. Mm-hmm. And often they're told, from when they get to be a manager, they're told things that don't help. Like, for instance, the idea that since you've come up from this group, or you are now management, you mustn't be friends with anyone, because that will be twisted by it, the gossip will start. And I understand that's a wall of protection for legally, Mm-hmm. But there is a way, again, to be authentic and vulnerable, have a time when your door is open, or walk around and actually understand and know these people and support them in a way that makes you the kind of leader that nobody wants to leave. Everybody wants to be on your team, because you're perceived as not necessarily a disciplinarian, but a coach.
More of that is needed. I could talk to you about that for hours. Wow. So I have an off the wall improv question for you. Okay. An entrepreneur, if they're as talented as you are, do you think Adding a character to their marketing mix would help, or if they're not as talented as you are, should they have a caricature of themselves in their marketing materials or some animated character?
No, I think it depends upon your audience and your industry. And I do know that studies show that I will say the millennials and younger really like that, really like that. Now, the danger persists that if you want to do such a thing yourself, if you're not trained as an actor or you don't get actor trained, it's rough waters to tread in. I think it's better to have a caricature than try to do it yourself, because just think of all the times, and I can say, Diane, we look like maybe we're in the same generation. Do you remember there were times when you saw people dress up for their advertisements and
Mm,
it was just so cheesy?
mm.
Everybody's like, I would never, I don't want anything to do with that brand because that guy is so sickening. You have to be careful.
Yep.
But who can dislike a cute little animated figure?
Mhm. What two lessons do you think entrepreneurs can take from improvisation?
The first lesson is to invest with an open mind about the improv principles. The first one is the yes and principle. It's the bedrock of what we call the improv mindset.
Mm.
Because I'll tell you, especially in healthcare or any risk averse industry, when you know that if you do something, make a mistake or do something wrong, that it can harm someone or kill someone, you are trained more on the, I want to say, the detective mode, which is say yes, but every time you want to find the flaw in whatever is happening. We have to be trained like that, because otherwise we wouldn't always find our mistakes. That notwithstanding, there is a possibility, in my mind, I know because I've done it, of in the back of your mind saying, okay, yes, but what could be wrong with this picture is kind of the thing that we're thinking.
Mm.
But then when we hear a new idea, just to give it fertile ground, saying, all right, let's talk about that. Let's accept that as a premise until we prove it's not going to work down the road. But if, yes, and if this were so, what else could be so? And that is what you find is the kind of mindset that happens in, oh, let's see, Amazon, Google, Facebook, all of these big companies started with some young people who said, we want to change the market, but we don't know exactly how. Let's toss around some ideas.
Final question. What career advice would you give to nurses today or someone that wants to enter nursing?
Don't let other people tell you not to. That's number one. And here's another one. When I was teaching the graduate school of nursing at a wonderful school, and I knew that we had people coming into the program who, this particular program was what they call a bridge program, which means you could come in with a bachelor's on just about any subject. And it'll take a little longer to get your master's, but when you do, you'll have the tools to change the healthcare system. We'll teach you economics and finance and psychology and this and that and the other thing. Well, nurses are always taught about psychology, but anyway, we'll give you the tools to be a leader. And that's not always what happens with an undergraduate degree in nursing. So I would say to those students, why are you here? And I would get a variety of answers. sometimes the answers would be something like, well, the Labor Bureau projections are that we really need a lot of nurses. And I know you can have a comfortable living being in nurse management. And others might say, well, I come from a long line of nurses, or my father was a doctor, or something like that. I would tell those people respectfully that at the end of the course, and I taught things like research and leadership, if they were not really called to be a nurse, please change their major, because it's too difficult. If you do not sincerely want to make a difference in the lives of people, and that is a messy business. You don't have to, so people say, oh, I can't stand blood, so I wouldn't. Well, okay, if you know that's a limitation for you, then probably it's not a great place for you to be. But if you go into it, thinking, I'm just going to do management, I don't want to get my hands dirty, Miss Nightingale would disagree. It's true, she was a great administrator, but boy, she got her hands dirty. You better believe it. She was one-on-one with people when she needed to be. And that is the kind of leader I think that nurses need. And here's one last thought. Diana, if you've ever been a patient, anybody who's ever been on the other side of the bed understands that you can pretty much size up your care for the next 8 or 12 hours by the kind of interaction that you see in the first minute or so. And if you have that kind of a caregiver who you don't sense really has your best interest at heart, it's heartbreaking. And there are studies that show, and Nightingale was the first one to study this, it actually impedes your healing. You need to be surrounded by people, and nurses are the first line of that defense, who sincerely have your best interests at heart. And that's why it's a very ecumenical career. There should be no political or other overtones, and that's the way we're trained. So that is why also nurses have been voted again for about the 18th year the most trusted profession.
Really? Wow. Yeah, if you don't have a good nurse, you should be scared right away. You're right. Candy, this has been really an interesting interview. I so appreciate you being with us today and bring us your world of wisdom and all of your careers and some ideas for managers in the healthcare industry and doctors and nurses to take away today. Thank you.
Well, thank you. My pleasure.
Thank you for watching Business Notes. We've been speaking with the talented Dr. Candy Campbell, international speaker, award-winning actor, author, filmmaker, portrait artist, and nurse. I'm your host, Diane Bogino, bringing you business ideas you can bank on.